William Saliba is currently undergoing medical tests, and there is a real possibility he will need back surgery. Right now, while that process is unfolding, Arsenal are also trying to close two of the biggest transfers of their summer. This is happening at the same time as four other first-team players are dealing with injuries of their own. That is the picture inside the club this week, and it is the picture I want to break down for you piece by piece. If Saliba needs surgery, the club could be without their most important defender for the remainder of the calendar year. At the same time, Saka is managing an Achilles issue, Declan Rice has a hamstring problem, Jurrien Timber has a groin injury, and Ben White has a knee issue. 5 key players carrying fitness concerns at once is not a small thing. It changes how the club has to plan the rest of this transfer window. It changes who they prioritise signing. And it changes how much risk they can afford to take with players who are not yet fully proven at this level. Before I go further, if you want deeper analysis like this every single time something moves in this window, hit that subscribe button now. I go through every confirmed fact and every rumour separately, so you always know exactly what is real and what is not. Now let us get into everything that is actually happening. I am going to walk you through every single update piece by piece. I will tell you exactly what was said, and then I will give you my own reading of what it actually means for the club. The update reads as follows. Arsenal and Aston Villa are in club-to-club talks over the transfer of Morgan Rogers. Senior figures from both clubs are in direct contact, while personal terms are not expected to be an issue. The Morgan Rogers deal is gathering pace. Here is my read on this. The phrase senior figures in direct contact tells you this has moved past the speculative stage. Clubs do not put their senior staff on the phone with each other unless there is a genuine willingness on both sides to find a number that works. The fact that personal terms are described as not expected to be an issue is also significant. In most transfer sagas, wages and contract length are where things stall. If that part is already smoothed over, the only remaining obstacle is the transfer fee itself, which is usually the fastest part to resolve once two boards are already speaking directly. The update reads as follows. Morgan Rogers is believed to be Arsenal's primary forward target this summer, with interest set to intensify. Villa do not want to sell Morgan Rogers, but interest is set to intensify after England were knocked out of the World Cup. My analysis here is straightforward. Being described as a primary target, rather than one of several options, tells you where this sits in the club's list of priorities. It is worth noting that Aston Villa's stated position is that they do not want to sell him. That is an important detail for you to hold on to, because it means any deal that does get done will likely need to be at a price that overrides a reluctant seller. The World Cup exit being flagged as a reason interest is intensifying suggests that timing and circumstance are now working in the buying club's favour, even if the selling club's original stance has not changed. The update reads as follows. Arsenal's start to the season has gone from bad to worse. William Saliba is reportedly undergoing medical tests and could require back surgery. The other players affected are Saka with an Achilles injury, Declan Rice with a hamstring injury, Jurrien Timber with a groin injury, and Ben White with a knee injury. This is the piece of information that frames everything else happening this summer. 5 separate injuries across the spine of the team, including a possible surgery for the club's best centre-back, is not something you can treat as background noise. It directly explains why there is now growing urgency around signing another central defender. When I put this next to the other stories, you start to see a clear pattern. The business Arsenal are doing this summer is not just ambition for the sake of it. Some of it is now being driven by necessity. The update reads as follows. Christos Tzolis has been omitted from the Club Brugge squad for their friendly against Heerenveen. The player will travel to London this weekend to undergo his medical at Arsenal. My take on this is simple. Being left out of a friendly squad specifically so a player can travel for a medical is one of the clearest signals in football that a transfer is close to being finalised. Clubs do not risk a player's fitness or focus in a meaningless fixture once terms are agreed. This tells me that Tzolis' deal is at the final administrative stage rather than still being negotiated. The update reads as follows. Arsenal want to add another defender to their squad. Ezri Konsa would be an ideal signing, while John Martin, aged 20, of Real Sociedad, is another player thought to be on the club's radar. Andrea Berta likes having multiple targets. Here is what stands out to me. The phrase multiple targets tells you this is not a one-name situation. When a club is working 2 names for the same position at the same time, it usually means they are hedging against the risk that their preferred option becomes too expensive or too slow to close. Given what we already know about the injury situation at the back, this makes complete sense as a strategy rather than indecision. The update reads as follows. Christos Tzolis could make his unofficial Arsenal debut in the first pre-season match with Girona on August 1st, having not been involved in any summer action. Arsenal's official pre-season start date is Monday, July 20th. My reading of this is that the club is already planning matchday involvement for a player whose transfer has not even been formally completed in the eyes of the public. That level of planning only happens when the deal is considered as good as done internally. It also tells us something about squad management. A player who has had no summer football will need managing carefully in terms of match fitness, and building him in for a first pre-season fixture rather than throwing him straight into a heavier workload shows a deliberate, controlled approach. The update reads as follows. Arsenal have opened talks over a potential move for Mainz midfielder Christos Tzolis. The 25-year-old is viewed as a more affordable alternative to Bruno Guimaraes, with Mainz reportedly valuing him at around €60 million, which is £51 million. Tzolis impressed for Japan at the World Cup and has emerged as one of the Bundesliga's standout ball-winning midfielders. Liverpool are currently believed to be leading the race, but Arsenal remain in the mix. This one needs to be treated carefully, and I want to be very clear with you here. This is a rumour, not a confirmed transfer. What is confirmed is that talks have opened, which is an early-stage action. My analysis is that describing him as a more affordable alternative tells you exactly why his name has entered the conversation. If a marquee midfield target becomes difficult or expensive to sign, clubs naturally widen their search to players who can offer similar defensive qualities at a lower cost. The detail that Liverpool are currently leading the race is important context. It tells you Arsenal are not in the strongest position for this particular target right now. The update reads as follows. Real Madrid are not ruling out a sale of Vinicius Jr. this summer if they sign Michael Olise. The sale of the Brazilian could help fund the acquisition of Michael Olise. Arsenal are informed of the situation. I want to flag straight away that this is a rumour involving two other clubs, and Arsenal's only confirmed role in it is being informed of the situation. That is a passive position, not an active pursuit. My analysis is that this is worth tracking rather than acting on emotionally, because being informed simply means the club is aware of developments elsewhere that could eventually affect the market. It does not mean a move for Vinicius Jr. himself is happening. The update reads as follows. Arsenal have extensively monitored several right-backs in recent months. The names mentioned are Wesley, age 22, of Roma, Ivan Fresneda, age 21, of Sporting Club Portugal, Namdi Collins, age 22, of Eintracht Frankfurt, and Tino Livramento, age 23, of Newcastle. Livramento had been viewed as one of their leading targets before his latest injury setbacks. My reading here is that this is a scouting list rather than an active negotiation, and I think it is important to be honest with you about that distinction. 4 names being monitored tells you the club is doing its due diligence across the position rather than being fixed on one player. The detail about Livramento is the most telling part. Injury setbacks changing a player's standing on a target list shows you how directly fitness concerns, even in a player Arsenal do not currently own, can reshape recruitment planning. The update reads as follows. Arsenal want to sign Ezri Konsa from Aston Villa, but currently there is a £20 million gap in valuation. The Gunners want to pay roughly £40 million, whereas Aston Villa want £60 million for the 28-year-old. This was 2 weeks ago, and currently there has still been no breakthrough. This gives us hard numbers, and numbers are always useful because they remove ambiguity. A £20 million gap between two clubs is significant, but not usually insurmountable in a market where fees continue to move throughout a window. My analysis is that the phrase no breakthrough after 2 weeks suggests this has stalled rather than progressed, at least as of this update. It is a useful reminder that not every story in this window is moving at the same speed. Some are accelerating, like Rodgers and Tzolis. Others, like Konsa, appear to be stuck. The update reads as follows. If William Saliba requires back surgery, is Ezri Konsa a good enough replacement for Arsenal? The comparison for the 25-26 Premier League season shows the following. Konsa recorded 102 duels won compared to Saliba's 125. Konsa had a pass completion rate of 96.2% compared to Saliba's 93.1%. Konsa made 134 clearances compared to Saliba's 145. Konsa picked up 0 yellow cards and 1 red card, while Saliba picked up 2 yellow cards and 0 red cards. Konsa's average rating was 6.99 compared to Saliba's 7.02. What I find most interesting in this comparison is that it is closer than a lot of people might expect. Saliba leads in duels won and clearances, which makes sense given his profile as Arsenal's primary defensive leader. But Konsa actually has a higher pass completion percentage, which tells you he is comfortable and reliable in possession. The disciplinary numbers are worth noting too. One red card for Konsa against 0 for Saliba is a small sample detail, but it is the kind of thing that gets highlighted when a player is being assessed as a replacement in a title-chasing squad. Overall, the numbers support the idea that Konsa would not be a downgrade in quality, even if his statistical strengths are slightly different from Saliba's. The update reads as follows. Arsenal have set an asking price of £20 million for Gabriel Jesus. The player has just 1 year left on his contract. AC Milan are currently the strongest contenders for the striker. They are trying to reach an agreement with Arsenal for a fee below the valuation. My analysis here centres on the contract detail. 1 year remaining is the single most important number in this update. It explains exactly why Arsenal have set a valuation at all, rather than simply keeping him and running the risk of losing him for nothing next summer. AC Milan trying to negotiate below the stated asking price is completely standard behaviour in this situation, because they know the selling club's leverage weakens the closer a player gets to the final year of his deal. The update reads as follows. Arsenal are now preparing for the possibility that William Saliba could require surgery on a back injury, a procedure that could sideline him for the remainder of the calendar year, forcing the club to reassess their defensive strategy this summer. Arsenal entered the summer looking to sign a new right-back, ideally a versatile option who could compete with or potentially replace Ben White. Arsenal are now increasingly inclined to keep White, while also signing another defender. This is one of the most important updates in the entire window because it explains the logic behind almost everything else we have covered. A shift from looking to replace Ben White to instead keeping him and adding another defender is a direct response to the Saliba situation. When your title-winning centre-back is facing a procedure that could rule him out for months, you cannot afford to also be experimenting with change at right-back. My analysis is that this single update is effectively the strategic key that unlocks why the club's transfer priorities have moved the way they have. Before I move into the two longer stories, I want to take a moment to connect these 13 updates into one coherent picture, because on their own, each one is just a fragment. Together, they tell a much bigger story about how a football club actually operates under pressure. You have an attacking rebuild being driven forward through Morgan Rogers and Christos Tzolis. You have a defensive rebuild being forced into existence by injury, centred on Saliba's uncertain status and the search for cover through Konsa and the wider right-back list. You have a value-driven exit being managed through Gabriel Jesus, where a club protects itself financially against losing an asset for nothing. And you have two longer-term midfield conversations, one active in Sano and one much bigger in scale involving Bruno Guimaraes. None of these are happening in isolation. Recruitment departments do not work through one deal at a time. They run parallel tracks, and the injury list we discussed earlier is clearly influencing how those tracks are being prioritised against each other right now. Now let us move from the individual updates into the two fuller stories, because these give us the clearest picture yet of where two of the biggest deals of the summer currently stand. Arsenal insider story, Morgan Rogers. The information here states that Arsenal are now close to completing the signing of Morgan Rogers from Aston Villa, with new meetings arranged for next week to finalise the fee. Rogers has been strongly linked with the move throughout the summer, and with England's involvement at the World Cup now over, the pace of talks has picked up. According to sources reporting from Switzerland, this deal is described as closer than it has ever been. A fee of up to €100 million is being discussed, and Rogers has reportedly already agreed personal terms, along with a contract running until the year 2031. It is also stated that Arsenal remain interested in Rogers' Villa teammate Ezri Konsa, and that the club is also looking at a central midfielder and possibly another striker before the window closes. My analysis of this story is that the scale of the numbers involved tells you exactly how highly this player is rated internally. A potential fee stretching up to €100 million places this among the most significant deals of the entire European summer, not just Arsenal's own business. The detail about personal terms already being agreed, combined with a contract length running all the way to 2031, tells me the club is not viewing this as a short-term reinforcement. They are building around this player for the long haul. What I also want you to notice is how this story connects directly back to the defensive situation we have already discussed. The continued interest in Konsa alongside the Rogers pursuit shows that Arsenal are trying to do business with the same selling club on two fronts at once, which is often how relationships between two boards can either accelerate multiple deals together or complicate them if leverage becomes an issue on either side. I also want to point out the wider context mentioned here, the idea that the club's ambition does not stop with Rogers. A central midfielder and possibly another striker being lined up tells you this is shaping into one of the most active windows the club has had in some time. When you place that ambition next to the injury list we broke down earlier, you start to understand the real balancing act the recruitment team is managing. They are trying to strengthen the squad for next season while also patching gaps created by fitness concerns that were not part of the original summer plan. Team talk story, Bruno Guimaraes. This report centres on comments from a former Premier League scout who describes the move for Bruno Guimaraes from Newcastle to Arsenal as close enough that he expects it to eventually get done. It is stated that Guimaraes informed Newcastle weeks ago of his desire to leave, following the earlier departures of Anthony Gordon and Sandro Tonali from the club. His interest in a move stems from Arsenal's continued pursuit, and while previous approaches have been turned down by Newcastle, the report suggests progress has still been made. The final transfer fee remains unresolved, with suggestions of a middle ground somewhere around £90 million. It is also noted that Newcastle's original valuation had been described elsewhere as around £100 million, while verbal discussions have reportedly ranged between £45 and £60 million. A separate Newcastle-focused source adds that there has not been a fresh official approach from Arsenal in around a month, though this is described as possibly a deliberate pause rather than a withdrawal of interest, with suggestions that Arsenal may already have shifted the balance of the situation in their favour psychologically. My analysis of this one requires a bit more care, because there are several different numbers being floated here, and I think it is important for you to understand why that happens in stories like this. When you see a valuation range moving between £45 million and £100 million across different reports, that usually tells you negotiations have not reached a formal offer and counter-offer stage yet. Both clubs are still testing the water through intermediaries and public positioning rather than sitting down with firm numbers on the table. The player's own stated desire to leave is the most concrete fact in this entire story, and it is significant. A player publicly, or at least privately and reportedly, informing his club of his intention to leave changes the entire dynamic of a negotiation. It puts pressure on the selling club, because keeping an unhappy player, especially one as important as Guimaraes has been for Newcastle, creates its own risks around morale and performance. The detail about no fresh official approach in around a month is worth sitting with for a moment. On the surface, that might look like Arsenal have lost interest or moved on. But when you read it alongside the suggestion that Newcastle may already feel like they are losing control of the situation, a different picture emerges. Sometimes in this business, stepping back publicly is itself a form of pressure. It signals to the selling club that the buying club is not desperate, which can, over time, soften a selling club's position rather than harden it. I want to stress again that everything in this particular story remains unresolved and should be treated as an ongoing situation rather than a confirmed transfer. The fee is not agreed, no formal bid has been reported as accepted, and the timeline for a resolution is still open. So here is where everything stands. Confirmed and advanced, we have Christos Tzolis heading for his medical this weekend and a possible pre-season debut against Girona on August 1st. Gathering real pace, we have Morgan Rogers, with new meetings scheduled and personal terms reportedly already agreed. Still unresolved with a clear valuation gap, we have Ezri Konsa. Still an open and developing situation, we have Bruno Guimaraes. And running underneath every single one of these stories is the defensive crisis, headlined by the uncertainty around William Saliba's back injury, which appears to be shaping almost every decision this recruitment team is making right now. I also want to leave you with one final observation before I go, because I think it is the most important takeaway from everything we have covered today. Every major decision inside this club right now traces back to one central question, and that question is how serious the Saliba situation turns out to be. If the tests come back and surgery is avoided, I would expect the club to continue pushing hard on the attacking side of their business, with Rogers and Tzolis as the headline additions, while the Konsa and right-back conversations continue at their current, slower pace. But if surgery is confirmed and Saliba is ruled out for the rest of the calendar year, do not be surprised if the defensive business accelerates sharply in the coming weeks. A £20 million valuation gap can close very quickly when a club suddenly finds itself needing a replacement rather than simply wanting an upgrade. That is the lens I want you to watch all of this through going forward. Not each story in isolation, but how the medical outcome for one player is quietly setting the pace for almost everything else happening around him. That is the full picture as it stands today. If you want me to come back the moment any of these situations move forward, whether that is a medical being confirmed, a fee being agreed, or new injury news on Saliba, make sure you are subscribed so you do not miss it. I will see you in the next one.